Now, some people, when they have difficult conversations, well, they just don't want to have them at all. Some people shirk back from those conversations and turn away from them. And now, as a student of communication, really my whole life, I find that interesting. Some people just don't want to have those difficult conversations. And so they stay away from them. They just don't have them. So thank you and good night. No, that's too easy. That's too easy. Other people, well, they don't want to have them either, but they just postpone them. And I'll tell you more about those people in my next speech. No, we're here to take it head on. Now, what I find is that when people take those difficult situations and those difficult conversations head on, they end up with a life that is richer and fuller and has more depth and has more of exactly what they want in it because they were bold enough to speak up and ask for what they wanted and to talk about things when things weren't working. And that's what I wish for you tonight. And my hope is that you leave here with just a couple of tips that enable you to take those difficult situations head on. Now, the research on difficult conversations shows that it costs an organization on average $1,500 for every difficult conversation that we're not having. $1,500. That's like a bag of kale chips at Whole Foods. That's a lot of money. But actually, I think it's probably more than $1,500 per conversation. More like $15,000 or $115,000. If you take, for example, an underperforming employee who needs to be coached up to performance level, or perhaps even coached out of the organization altogether, that employee is likely costing your organization far more than $1,500. Case in point, Sean. I was invited into an organization to work with Sean, not his real name. His real name was Tim. Now, Sean was an engineer, and much like the Peter Principle, he had been promoted to his level of incompetence. Sean was not a people person. A brilliant engineer, yes. Manager, not so much. So his organization brought me in to work with Sean and a few others in the organization. And some of what I shared with Sean are some of the same things I'm going to be sharing with you tonight. Now, what was happening in Sean's organization is that the people who reported him so much did not like reporting to him that they were leaving. And there was a lot of turnover in Sean's department, hence bringing me in. Now, Sean was able to actually turn some things around and become a better manager. Now, he never truly became a people person, but he did find some ways to connect with people, even as an engineer, so that they could have a relationship that was stronger and a relationship that worked. Now, as a result of the reduced turnover, Sean's employer gave him a bonus of $1,500 so he could buy his own bag of kale chips at Whole Foods. Now, a recent study shows that the average employee wastes 8 hours of productive business time avoiding a difficult conversation. 8 hours. That's a lot of time. Now, in the average marriage, we spend about 25 years avoiding a difficult conversation. Now, when I do my research with folks to find out if that 8-hour number is true, I find that I get a very different answer. In fact, I get a much larger number. People spend about 6 hours talking with anyone and everyone who will listen to them about the situation, except, of course, the person they need to have the conversation with. So, their other coworkers, the custodian, when they pick up the customer service line. Yeah, enough about your problems. Let me tell you about my annoying coworker. Whew. So 6 hours doing that, and then another 5 hours ruminating about the situation. Laying awake at night, thinking about it, rehashing the situation, binge watching your favorite shows on Netflix, thinking about the situation some more. Then another 3 hours doing, procrastinating, doing non-meaningful work. Sitting at your desk, organizing your paper clips, bending your paper clips, rebending your paper clips. Things like that, not productive work time. But then they come back to the team and they say, hey, I got you all something from Tiffany's. Well, Tiffany's desk, it's right over there. Look what I made you. Nice paperclip necklace. So 3 hours avoiding the situation, and then an additional 2 hours procrastinating using social media. Now, most people aren't going to go out onto Facebook and complain about their colleague. They're going out to Facebook to look for some social support in some other ways, kind of see if anybody's liked their posts lately, looking for the love. And then from Facebook, they click through to something on Twitter, and that takes them over to Pinterest, and before you know it, ding! Zappos delivers. So we spend an awful lot of time and money, sizes and costs may vary, but a lot of time procrastinating from having those difficult conversations. Now, part of the reason that we fear having those difficult conversations is right in our DNA. Because any kind of situation that's threatening to us or that makes us feel ill at ease, our body and our brain want to protect us from that. So pulling back from that is just a natural thing for our bodies and brains to do. It's our fight or flight mechanism. Now, when we pull back from that difficult conversation and don't have it, obviously that's flight. We're pulling away. Now, when we go to the other extreme though, fight, and we get aggressive and antagonistic, we immediately put the other person on the defensive. And when people are on the defensive, their brains don't work in the same way that they usually do. You see, when we are in fight or flight, and especially that fight portion, the blood flow goes from our head out to our limbs. So we are ready to run and hide or climb a tree to get to safety or defend our village from that saber-toothed tiger that's coming after us. You see, from an evolutionary biology standpoint, our brains and bodies have not kept up with the increased pace in modernity, in our modern life. So our work life and our culture has evolved so quickly, our bodies and brains can't keep up. So there's that primitive part of our brain that still reacts as if that saber-toothed tiger is coming after us. Now, neuroscientists have shed some light on this, and they talk about something called an arousal continuum. Not that kind of arousal. Eric over here was thinking I was talking about Monday Night Football. Now, if you don't know Eric, he used to play football for Iowa State back in the day, because everybody's got to have a safety school. Now, the arousal continuum works like this. At the low level of the arousal continuum, we're calm. We may be enjoying time with friends or family or watching TV. Or if your friends and family are interesting, then you'd be in that next phase on the arousal continuum where you're actually in cognitive arousal. You're interested in what's going on, you're curious and you're engaged. Just above that is the alarm phase. Now you might go into the alarm phase, let's say you're sitting at Thanksgiving dinner and you're just really hoping for a really lovely dinner, and instead crazy Uncle Buck starts to bring up politics and you've got people on each end of the spectrum. That could send Aunt June into alarm. Now, Aunt June might go from alarm right into fear. And when she goes right into fear, see, she doesn't want to have that conversation. She doesn't want to have that conversation happen at the dinner table. And what does? She reaches for the brandy to conquer the fear. But guess what? That usually doesn't happen. That usually doesn't help. Anyway, then just beyond fear is terror. And when we are in a place of terror, well, it's kind of like a man in a bridal shop. Part of the brain just shuts right down. Now, again, it's in our DNA to react and to get defensive when we feel threatened. And that threat could be a threat in the workplace, that could be something that's threatening our job, it could be something that's threatening our self-concept. It doesn't really matter where the threat comes from, but we get defensive. And defensiveness is really bad for team dynamics. Have you ever noticed that in the workplace? Defensiveness is really bad for team dynamics. So bad things happen when people get defensive. People start doing things like information hoarding, which puts your organization at risk. And They also start doing things like procrastinating and not taking on team assignments, which then leads to an unequal distribution of labor and unequal distribution of work on the team. And then they also can get passive aggressive. And that results in everything's fine. There's nothing wrong. Everything's just fine. When people get passive aggressive, that's what they do. All right, now, when we are ready to start a difficult conversation with someone, there's a specific way to do it. And not a lot of people know these very first few steps that will help people stay in a non-defensive space. Instead, what people often do is they say something like, "We need to talk," or "We need to have a meeting." In fact, once, as an example, once my husband sent me a text that said, "We need to have a meeting after the kids are down to bed." Whew, arousal continuum, right up there. And you know, some couples have meetings where they talk about family finances and vacation plans and so on. And while we have those conversations, we don't typically call them meetings. Now, other couples use the word meeting as a euphemism for grown-up time after the kids are down. That's not our word. But we need to talk, or we need to have a meeting. Send people right up that arousal continuum. So case in point, an organization where I worked with the senior leadership team on some leadership dynamics, the chief operating officer there, her name was Susan, and that was her real name. Susan couldn't figure out why nobody liked her. And as I began to do some interviews with people in the organization, I found out that people were absolutely petrified of her. So I did a little more digging, and I found out that the previous CEO would move an entire division under Susan's leadership. She would make some layoffs, and then shortly thereafter, that group of people would move back to their regular leadership. And this pattern had repeated itself several times. Now, Susan is a very competent, very efficient leader in her organization. And so many days, she would come into work and fire off a couple of quick emails to people that she needed to see that day, not thinking carefully about adding the additional context that might be needed to that meeting notice. So you might get a message in your inbox from Susan that says, "See me when you get in." People would be quaking in their boots to go see Susan, not even knowing what it was about, but absolutely petrified that they might get fired or laid off. Now, Susan had no idea that this is what was going on in their minds, that she was sending them into a terror tailspin before they even found out what the meeting was about. And a lot of times it was a benign topic, nothing to get too concerned or worried about. Now, what should she do instead? Stop by, you're not getting fired, would probably not be the best move in terms of an email to send. She might send something instead like, "Hey, stop by, I have cookies." Now, Susan would have those in a to-go container for her employees because she was in a hurry. When people say, "We need to talk," again, it sends people right up that defensive mechanism, and we get defensive. So there has to be another way. Now, if we tried to just talk to our manager about just what the issue was and say, let's say you've got a micromanagement issue with your boss and you want to talk to them about that. So you know you're not going to send an email that says, "We need to talk," or "We need to have a meeting." And you're probably not going to start that conversation with like, "So about your micromanagement of me." That's probably not going to go well. In fact, the boss is going to say, "What are you talking about? I don't micromanage you. In fact, if you ever have something like this that you need to bring up to me again, I'd like a full report with a detailed occurrence log. I need a Venn diagram, a RACI matrix, and a PowerPoint presentation." And hey, nice necklace. Now, that's not the way to start. In my book, I describe in detail a different way to start a conversation in a way that's designed to have the other person not get defensive. And I call it the fact and model. It starts with agreement. You start with a fact that the other person agrees with. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be a fact per se. It could be a strongly held opinion or belief, but something that the other person is bound to agree with. And from there, you use the word and, it's called fact and you add another fact, and the word and another fact. And you tee up a few facts, and then you get to the impact, the issue, the problem, if you will. In setting up the conversation this way, you keep the other person in agreement, and by nature, they cannot get defensive if they're in agreement, because if they're in agreement, there's nothing to defend themselves against. So let's say you could take that micromanagement situation on with this model. So you might say to your boss, hey, I know that the Acme account is particularly important to our company for the fourth quarter, to meet our fourth quarter goals. And my team is doing everything we can to pull out all the stops to give them the best service possible. And I know how important this account is, not only to the company, but to you personally. And I know you want a lot of check-ins on how it's going. And when you stop by my desk several times a day to find out how it's going, it gets in the way of me giving them the very best service. So that very last piece, it gets in the way of me giving them their very best service. All of your stopping by is the impact, the organizational impact. And it really does need to come down to an organizational impact. What's different or what's changing or what's wrong in the organization that is in the way. Now, it's so important when you get right up to that point that you not use the word but or however to connect that organizational impact to the facts that you have teed up. Now, you grammar nerds will understand this because but and however are conjunctive adverbs. Now, we know from Schoolhouse Rock that conjunction is an and that there are other words that do that too. And is just a flat-out conjunction. But and however, conjunctive adverbs. So they are connecting words, but they also have some descriptive properties to them. And the descriptive properties that come with but and however are that whatever comes next is different than what came before. So if the person was agreeing with you, fact, and you've got building all this beautiful agreement. However, when you stop by my desk 6 times a day, it gets in the way of me giving them the very best service possible. Before you even said what the impact was, your boss started to disagree with you because they knew agreement, however, disagreement. Whatever comes next, I'm not going to agree with because it is different than what came before. So get those buts and howevers out of the tee-up of your difficult conversations. You can use them later in the conversation, absolutely, but they do not belong right there in the middle. Now, every once in a while, there's an issue that comes along that is more complicated, more nuanced, more personal, and more sensitive than just your standard run-of-the-mill office situation. And in those situations, I suggest you use something called a sensitivity cue. And a sensitivity cue does this. It communicates to the other person that this is about to get weird. We're going into some uncomfortable territory. Now, a lot of times, those sensitivity cues happen with things like body odor. And in my line of work, working with many organizations, I've seen, heard, and smelled it all. What I recommend in a sensitivity cue, when you need to use a sensitivity cue, and it sounds something like this. What I'm about to bring up is an uncomfortable topic. Or, I always get uncomfortable when I need to address something like this with an employee. Again, it tells the person like, whoa, this is going to go in a strange place. I'm about to get uncomfortable, but I guess maybe I feel a little bit better because my boss or whoever's having the conversation with me is already uncomfortable. So it kind of equalizes the playing field, if you will. Now, when those situations come up, especially the odor issue, I always find, and many senior leaders that I've talked with about this agree with me, that it's helpful to bring up a whole range of olfactory offenses that might occur in the workplace. Everything from not showering frequently enough to too much cologne to, I once worked with an agricultural organization where if they didn't clean off their boots before they came into the office, they had a manure problem. Now, that would be a much worse problem if this were a healthcare industry as opposed to an agriculture industry. Now, some people will handle the body odor situation in a little bit differently. They'll say, well, come, let's have a meeting. We need to meet. And then they'll pull out the employee manual, and they'll flip through and they'll find just the right page. And they'll say, we need to review a few things. When you arrive every day, we need you to park in the employee parking lot. And we do like people to shower and scrub behind the ears daily. And we need you to punch in by 8 and punch out by 5. Now, did I mention the part about the employee parking lot? That's a classic example of the sandwich method. When we use the sandwich method, we're taking that critical information that we need to share and we're sandwiching it between two things that are relatively benign or sometimes even pleasant. Sometimes people also call it the roller coaster method, where you start on a high note, then you deal with the difficult stuff in a low point, and then you end on a high note again. Not a great way to hold a difficult conversation. It's confusing at best, and it damages the relationship at worst. And if you want to know more, you can read chapter 5 in my book. But I wonder, what would it be like if we all took on those difficult conversations, not just the big, ugly, hairy ones at work, but the little ones too. The little ones, where maybe a slight shift, something we're just tolerating or putting up with, if we could make a little shift there, that our lives could just be even a little bit better, 1 degree by 1 degree. What would it be like if we were able to be straight with each other more? What would it be like? Would we be able to create that life that we loved, that life that was richer and fuller and that had everything in it that we wanted because we were able to ask for it? I think that's available. I think that's available to us. And to get that rich, full life that has everything that we want in it, it is going to require that we take on some of those difficult topics in order to get our needs met, in order to create the space for the big, beautiful life that we want to live. So remember, the next time that you have the opportunity to have a difficult conversation, you can avoid it and make a paperclip necklace. You could send an email that says, "We need to talk." Or you can take that situation head on. Thank you.